Ramses II, king of Egypt, the third monarch of the 19th dynasty, 1292 to 1190 BCE, of ancient Egypt. Ramses II, Ramses, also spelled Ramesses or Ramesses, commonly known as Ramses the Great, reigned from 1279 to 13 BCE, the second longest period in Egyptian history. He is renowned for his massive building projects and the numerous colossal statues of him that can be found all over Egypt, in addition to his wars with the Hittites and the Libyans. Background and early years of reign. After the religious reformer Akhenaten, Amenhotep IV, 1353–36 BCE, came to power, Ramses, firmly of non-royal descent, set out to re-establish Egyptian dominance in Asia, which had waned under Akhenaten and his successor, Tutankhamun. In order to regain control of the northern regions that had fallen under Hittite rule due to recent unrest, Ramses' father, Seti I, put down a number of rebellious princes in Palestine and southern Syria and went to war with the Anatolian Hittites. At first, Seti was able to defeat the Hittites, but his victories were fleeting because by the conclusion of his rule, the enemy had erected a stronghold on the Orontes River at Kadesh, which served as the key to the Hittite southern boundary. Seti granted the future Ramses II, the crown prince Ramses, a special position as regent during his rule. He was given a royal home and harem by Seti, and the young prince followed his father on his journeys so that, by the time he assumed total control, he had already gained experience in both kingship and battle. Ramses was named as the heir at an exceptionally young age, maybe to guarantee that he would actually take the kingdom. When he was just 10 years old, he was ranked as a captain in the army. At that age, his status must have been honorary, even though he might have been undergoing military training. Ramses established a full-scale dwelling city for himself named Per-Ramesu, biblical, Ramses, since his family's home was in the Nile River Delta and to have a convenient base for expeditions in Asia. Per-Ramesu was renowned for its attractive layout, with gardens, orchards, and soothing waterways. The governing deities of its 4 quadrants were Amun in the west, Seth in the south, Wadjet, the goddess of the royal cobra, in the north, and, most importantly, Astarte, the Syrian goddess, in the east. In Egypt, there was a growing demand for Asian deities, and Ramses had clear inclinations in that direction. Ramses' first public act after assuming total control was to travel to Thebes, the capital of the southern region, for the important religious festival of Opet, during which the deity Amun of Karnak paid a state visit to the temple of Luxor in his ceremonial barge. The king took a detour at Abydos on his way back to his home in the north to worship Osiris and to make arrangements for the restarting of construction on the massive temple his father had built there before the latter's passing. Nebuchadnezzar, the high priest of Anhurut neighboring this, was also appointed by him as the new high priest of Amun at Thebes. Thines. Military exploits. Ramses' reputation as a great king in the eyes of his subjects appears to have depended heavily on his reputation as a soldier, in addition to his massive building operations and his well-known residential city. He marched an army north in the 4th year of his rule to retake the lost territories that his father had failed to permanently win. To create a safe springboard for subsequent advancements, the first expedition's goal was to defeat local dynasties in southern Syria that were in rebellion. His name and the date are all that are left of the inscription he set up to document the campaign's events at the Al-Kalb River, which is close to Beirut. Everything else has since faded away. The main expedition departed the next year. The Hittite stronghold at Kadesh was its intended target. The army stopped when it reached the southern part of the country of Amor, possibly in the Tripolis neighborhood. After traveling down the coastal road through Palestine and Lebanon, Ramses then separated a special task force, whose mission appears to have been to protect the port of Samarra before marching up the Elitharis River Valley, al-Nahr al-Kabr, to reunite with the main army at Kadesh. The main force then resumed its march toward the Orontes. The army was divided into 4 chariot and infantry divisions, with each division having about 5,000 soldiers. The army entered a wooded area before emerging on the plain in front of the city as it crossed the river from east to west at the Shabtuna ford, which is about 8 miles, 13 kilometers, from Kadesh. Ramses thought he only had to cope with the garrison of Kadesh because two captured Hittite spies told him the erroneous information that the main Hittite army was at Elpo, some distance to the north. Ramses didn't find out that the main Hittite army was actually hidden behind the city until the army had started to arrive at the camp location before Kadesh. Before Ramses could take any further action, the Hittites attacked with a force of 2,500 chariots, with 3 men to a chariot as opposed to the Egyptian 2, and 3 men to a chariot. Ramses and his tiny corps of household chariotry were completely besieged by the enemy and were battling valiantly when the top Egyptian divisions, taken completely by surprise, broke and fled in chaos. To the king's relief, the Sumerate task force arrived at the critical moment of the battle to join the main army, which prevented a catastrophe. The outcome of the battle was a tactical triumph for the Egyptians in that they maintained control over the devastated field, but a strategic loss in that they were unable to capture Kadesh. An armistice was reached and the Egyptians went back to their country because neither army was in a condition to continue fighting the following day. Due to the king's pride in his stand against overwhelming odds, the Battle of Kadesh is one of the very few pharaonic battles with authentic details. Images and accounts of the campaign, including an official account and a lengthy poem on the subject, were carved on temple walls in Egypt and Nubia, and the poem is also preserved on papyrus. Ramses had to fortify the northern limit of Egypt's Asian empire before confronting the Hittites once more, since the failure to conquer Kadesh had an impact on Egyptian prestige abroad, and several of the minor nations of South Syria and northern Palestine under Egyptian suzerainty rebelled. He captured a number of villages in Galilee and Amor in his 8th or 9th year in power, and the next year he was back on the Al-Kalb River. He may have overpowered the Hittites in the 10th year, capturing Katna and Tunipal where, in response to a surprise attack by the Hittites, he engaged in combat without his armor and holding them for long enough for a statue of himself as overlord to be built in Tunip. He invaded Kode, maybe the area between Alexandretta and Carchemish, in a subsequent advance. But like his father before him, he discovered that he could not hold territory against constant Hittite pressure so far from his base for an extended period of time. As a result, after 16 years of sporadic hostilities, a treaty of peace was signed in 1258 BCE that had reciprocal provisions and was between equal great powers. After the hostilities were done, the two countries developed good relations. Regular diplomatic correspondence took place between the two countries. In 1245, Ramses married the eldest daughter of the Hittite monarch, and it's conceivable that he later wed another Hittite princess. In addition to the conflict with the Hittites, there were punitive expeditions against Edom, Moab, and Negeb, as well as a more serious conflict with the Libyans, who were constantly attempting to invade and colonize the delta. It is likely that Ramses personally participated in the Libyan conflict but not the smaller expeditions. Wars don't appear to have occurred in the last years of the reign. Prosperity during the reign of Ramses II. The number of temples the kings could afford to build is one indicator of how prosperous Egypt was, and on that basis, even taking into account its lengthy rule, Ramses II is the most notable in Egyptian history. That, together with his skill in battle as shown in the temples, caused 19th century Egyptologists to refer to him as the Great, which is effectively how his subjects and subsequent generations saw him to them. He was the ideal monarch. Even in the time of decline that followed, it was an honor to be able to claim descent from him, and his subjects affectionately abbreviated him Sisi. 9 kings of the 20th dynasty, 1190 to 1075 BCE, went by this name. In Egypt, he finished the enormous hypostyle hall at Karnak, Thebes, and carried on with the construction of the temple that Seti I had begun at Abydos but left unfinished after the latter's demise. On the west bank of the Nile in Luxor, Thebes, Ramses also finished his father's funeral temple and constructed one for himself, which is today known as the Ramesseum. He constructed his own temple at Abydos, not far from his father's, in addition to the 4 main temples and numerous smaller shrines in his hometown. He built 6 temples in Nubia, Nilotic Sudan, the most impressive and well-known of which are the two at Abu Simbel that were carved out of a cliffside and include 4 enormous statues of the monarch. While Ramses was solely responsible for the smaller of the 2 projects, Seti I had started the larger one. His most important secular accomplishment, as far as is known, was the construction of Ramesses as well as the digging of a well in the eastern desert along the path to the Nubian gold mines. In terms of Ramses' private life, very little is known. Nefertari was his first and maybe favorite queen. A lesser temple at Abu Simbel was erected in her honor. Her beautiful tomb in the Valley of the Queens at Thebes is well known, and she appears to have passed away quite early in her reign. Other queens whose names are preserved were Isennefer, who bore the king 4 sons, among whom was Ramses' eventual successor, Merneptah and Matenfreyor, the Hittite princess. The king had a sizable harem in addition to the official queen or queens, as was typical, and he took great delight in his huge family of well over 100 offspring. Ramses II's mummy, which is preserved at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, is that of an extremely old man with a long, narrow face, a prominent nose, and a massive jaw. The best representation of Ramses II is a superb statue of him as a young man, which is currently in the Egyptian Museum of Turin. The final apogee of Egyptian imperial authority occurred under Ramses II's rule. After his passing, Egypt was put on the defense but was still able to hold on to its control over Palestine and the surrounding areas until the later years of the 20th dynasty, when the invasion of armed sea peoples into the Levant put an end to Egypt's influence outside of its borders. Despite the failure at Kadesh, Ramses II must have had good military skills because otherwise he would not have been able to advance as far into the Hittite Empire in the following years. He also seems to have had good administrative skills because the country was prosperous, and he was undoubtedly well liked. However, some of his notoriety must unquestionably be attributed to his penchant for public relations. His name and the accounts of his exploits in combat were widely known across Egypt and Nubia.